Hey guys, it's Eric. I wanted to try something different. I wanted to make a video about envy, a topic I'm very interested in. I was surprised to see, because I've spent so much time reading about envy on the internet, just regular like articles, psychological articles or blog posts or whatever. I was surprised to see that if you put the topic of like envious people into YouTube search, that there's a great many videos about it. In fact, I would recommend that you go to some of those videos first if you're interested in identifying like envious people, finding out if somebody's behavior is indicative of envy. A lot of really good stuff out there. That covers the basics, kind of in the sense of if somebody's envious of you, they're gonna, ignore or downplay or pick apart your achievements. They're not happy when you're happy. They're not pleased about the aspects of you that are successful or beautiful or virtuous. Lots of good stuff out there that I'd say check that out first, because I'm going to talk about 8 more subtle signs of envy. By way of a disclaimer, that doesn't mean just because I've been on the receiving end of envy or have perceived myself to have been, doesn't mean that I'm snagged in some sort of a narcissistic hallucination where I think everybody's envious and I'm so great. Or quite the contrary, envy will come into your life when you've had even the most mild success. And by mild, I don't even mean professional, or like it could be that you got the bigger piece of bread at the restaurant and the person across from you was like, why did he get the bread? I deserve the bread. It's like, it's just part of the human condition. Oftentimes if something good is happening to you or with you, or something you're good at or something good about you, others will like to use the method of reframing it as not good, to try and make it not good, as opposed to, putting in the work to actually compete with you or get something good for themselves. It's easier, cheaper for them to just try and swipe at you. Very, very pervasive problem, and insidious too. It hides. It's not something people readily admit to. It's on the surface. So it's good to remind ourselves what it looks like, where it is, what the indicators of it are, because it's not something that is out in the open, which is part of its ugliness. I'd like to talk about 8 subtle signs of envy that I've picked up on over time. Use the comments, tell me if I'm right, wrong, in between, if you resonate with this, if experienced anything like this. The first one is insidious sign of envy, or subtle sign of envy, is that it often starts with praise. Oftentimes, a relationship that gets eroded and falls into an envious relationship where you're on the receiving end of envy and this person is hating on you and they're not happy with the good stuff you've got going on, oftentimes starts with them praising that exact good stuff. Like maybe you're a musician. It starts off, they say, oh, you're a brilliant musician. But then as time goes on, you get closer, they're accustomed to this whole thing of you being a brilliant musician. They're not comfortable with it. They might probably, in all likelihood, don't have an equivalent talent or good thing happening. So you're going to find them being unhappy about it, chipping away at it. It's unfortunate. A lot of times the compliments do not make way for anything bad. Sometimes the compliments just, the relationship goes on for a long time, for years, decades, whatever, and it's still compliments and they still love you and appreciate you, and that's the ideal. But other times it's like you end up paying a tax for the compliments. They'll make sure they collect and they take it back and they poison it because they've admitted that they're impressed and it's beautiful and they don't like the power that has over them. And number 2, subtle sign of envy. The person that's envious of you, and this is shocking, took me years to wrap my mind around this, might actually be somebody who you perceive to be higher than you. Like, for example, let's say it's your boss, and your boss has all these professional accolades and successes, really strong resume, diamond-studded with, awards and achievements and building companies, and, somebody you think is a rock star. But this person is doing the exact same hating, envy stuff that somebody who you perceive as being behind you on the racetrack of life is doing. And you're like, whoa, like what? How could that be possible? You don't want to give it to yourself because you don't want to be an egomaniac. But then as time goes on, it's like, wait, this person really is doing this to me. Like, could be your youth, could be that they have imposter syndrome and they feel like their accomplishments weren't earned and that you have more talent than they do, and even though you're less outwardly successful than they are. Could be anything. They'll pick up on anything. Could be the way you look, the way you communicate, anything. So don't be surprised if you find envy in quote unquote high places. As a matter of fact, it's often the motivator and the source of anger and fuel that got the person that far, but doesn't mean they outran or outgrew their envy. Number 3, territorial. Subtle sign of envy. Envious people can be very territorial. Like if you just came to their workplace and you're the new one, or you just came to their town, you're a new person on the scene. It could be an industry, a field, could be social media, which is not it's open for everybody. It's free. There's billions of people there. But you've got your envious friend, then suddenly you sign up for the social media account, and they've been there for a couple of years, and they're like, "Oh, he's here now. Oh, okay." They act like it's their local bar, and they've got the lay of the land. They're suspicious. The reason they're territorial is because they can't compete head to head. They can't compete on the level of value, virtue, or substance. So they're going to use territory as the football. They're going to use been here longer, know the place better, have more sense of where we are than you. Very, very cheap, empty thing to use. But hey, that's how wars get started. It's not uncommon. Number 4, a little hard to explain. I'll do my best to wrap my tongue around this. In an envious relationship, you'll find often that the relationship is very complicated. And what I mean by that is, let's suppose you're tangled up with an envious person. It's a friendship, it's a working relationship, it's a romantic relationship. The person's envious of you. And let's suppose you're either through politeness or courtesy or just maybe denial or wishful thinking, positive thinking, you're not admitting, you're not there yet admitting that this could be envy that's causing all these problems. You're not going to let that be part of the conversation. So if you would omit that, even though you know in the back of your mind, or maybe even closer to the surface than that, you know that it's envy. But if you keep it out of the conversation, you find you're suddenly in the middle of this very complex relationship. It's like a hall of mirrors in the shape of a spiral staircase. It's like so complex. It's almost like you and the other person are locked in a political race that never ends. It's like, oh, well, he has his ideas and ideologies and values and beliefs, and I have my own system over here, and we just get snagged over. That is all chatter. That's all noise. None of that means anything. It's just an envious person who's been picking at you, poking away at you, trying to poke holes in your accomplishments and your talents and your virtues. And they're doing it under the mask of, yeah, here's what I believe. Maybe you're I'll use great musician again. I don't play music personally, but a great musician, but they're like kind of all over your technique. Well, I don't like, your technike's not as modern as what I like. And, the stuff I like is more contemporary, but your technique's a little more classical. And that's not really true. What they've done is they've developed their specific taste or preference around the fact that they can't stand that you're so good at music. Suddenly they're cultivating a personality that conveniently is the opposite of what you stand for. So complicated relationship, common in that subtle envy. Something you also got to be aware of, this is extremely subtle. Don't forget this when you're dealing with an envious person, because it can get ugly and it can get very emotional and intense, is that oftentimes with an envious person, in their mind, it's not as simple as they think, oh, they're so great, and I envy them. They're so great, and I'm so much less than them, and I feel envy. It's not always that black and white inside their head. In fact, what they've often done, this is the next subtle sign of envy, I've lost count, I think I'm on number 5, is that they rebrand you as a bad person. They even do that to themselves. They're not doing that just socially, spreading rumors and whatever, although that happens too. They've actually convinced themselves, like through self-hypnosis, that because you're a threat to them, you must be a bad person, because, again, better musician, better at your job, more beautiful. Oh, that person's bad. That person's just bad. And they believe it a lot of the time. A lot of times they're just pretending they believe it to cause trouble for you and lower your social standing and destroy you. A lot of times they've actually convinced themselves, and it's very subtle. It takes a centimeter of perspective shift, and suddenly it's like, whoa, not only is this person hating on me, but they really, really are disgusted with me. They really just think I'm awful. Now, that's how poisonous this stuff becomes. So don't lose sight of that. When you're in these altercations, it's not always as simple as, oh, they think they're locked up in being threatened by you. They might have taken the next step and turned that into you're really bad and you're evil. That can go to some very dangerous places. And number 6, this kind of goes hand in hand with the last one. is oftentimes if somebody's envious of you, they'll speak for a crowd that doesn't exist. They're the representative, the self-appointed representative of a crowd of one. So they'll say, well, people have said, I've heard, the word is getting around that JoJo's, computing skills are causing trouble for the company. Word is, be careful. It's not true. It's not true. They're only representing their own opinion. They might have some other losers along with them that are also threatened, and everybody's, cowed and threatened by how great you are. But for the most part, they come at you with, like they're representing the greater truth or they're representing the community. No, they're just obsessed with you. They're out there on their own, up at night, thinking about you and how much you represent all their shortfalls. So don't fall for it if they come and say the entire committee has a problem. Most of the time, that's not accurate. If the committee does have a problem, of course, you have to check yourself, but that's a whole other topic. Another one, number 7, which I'm smiling, which this has only happened a couple times, but it's amazing. So I don't know how common this one is. You can tell me in the comments, but sometimes the envious person, and this often happens in a friendship, the envious person will deliver this harsh, lacerating, hurtful, quote-unquote truth about you, directed straight at the thing that everybody else, including yourself, seems to acknowledge that you're good at, or something good about you, or something good that's happening with you. They'll give you the inside scoop. No, it's actually awful. You actually screwed up that thing you're acclaimed for. You're a fraud. It's actually terrible. They'll give you this horrible, envious truth. Then they'll tell you the reason why, number 7, is because while the rest of the world wants to lie to you and only praise you and throw sunshine at you and only make you think you're great, they're going to be the one that keeps it real and tells you the truth. Absolute nonsense. Absolutely ridiculous. The world, think about it just for a second. The world doesn't throw praise at anyone. The world is indifferent, neutral. The world is busy with its own stuff, paying its bills, its own problems in their life. The world doesn't say, oh yeah, we're here to reassure you that you're so great. Maybe the world will do that if you're not particularly great, if you're an open failure mess in the gutter. Yeah, the world will pat you on the head because nobody's threatened by you. For the most part, if you're anywhere on the spectrum of any kind of activity, mediocre or above, the world is going to be neutral, and if there is praise, it's going to be valid praise because they're impressed with whatever it is you're doing. So the world isn't lying to you. You don't need your envious friend to be the personal counselor going, I'll give it to you straight. All those people that are praising you, they're yes men. I, the friend that's doing so much less well than you, I have this horrible truth to tell you about all the things you think are going well. Ridiculous thing to do. Nobody's keeping it real by trying to destroy you. That's ridiculous. The final one, this is so good. It took me years to understand this. You have to really concentrate and pay attention, try and keep your emotions out of it to identify this one, which is hard when dealing with envy because it gets emotional, you get inflamed. But when you're dealing with an envious person, very subtle attribute of envy is where the end point of a fight is. Because remember, when somebody's envious, they're not admitting they're envious. So they might start drama with you. They might attack you and start a fight. But the fight isn't going to consist of, I'm envious of you. That's not what it looks like. It comes dressed in different clothes. It comes as, I have philosophical disagreements with that thing you said or did, right? And you have the fight. You're a good sport. You're not going to, just like they don't say, I'm envious, you're not going to come back and go, you're envious. That makes you look like an egomaniac. So you're here fighting. They're envious, but you can't admit it because they're not admitting it. So you're fighting over something unsaid. So you fight on their terms. You have the argument or debate or whatever it is on their terms. Whatever it is they attack you on, you have the philosophical, you say, this is where I was coming from, etc. Be very careful to identify where the fight ends. Because if the fight ends on philosophical terms, like let's say you agree to disagree, or they say, oh, I see where you're coming from, I never thought of it that way. Or they say, well, I still don't think you're right, but now I have a better sense of how you think about it. If the fight concludes around the open frontal topics of discussion, you can probably presume they're not envious. It's like, okay, there is a real disagreement and you take it seriously. And for what it's worth. If the fight ends elsewhere, there's probably envy. And that point is, if the fight concludes at the point where they've inflamed you, infuriated you, hurt you, or made you defend yourself, and then suddenly they're not texting back, they're not calling again, the email exchange ends, suddenly, it all boils up, everybody's fighting, and then they have nothing more to say. They don't want to stand their philosophical ground anymore. They're not pursuing their supposed point anymore. It's because they got what they wanted. They wanted to expose you as a real person, vulnerable, capable of being hurt, imperfect, and most importantly, not threatening to them. That's what they wanted. They wanted to make you less of a threat by exposing your raw humanity. And if the fight ends just with you in the middle of like, all right, then they never responded. I yelled back then they never responded. It's because they were done. They weren't sincere about the supposed point of argument. They got what they wanted the moment you were upset. So envy, very subtle. I apologize if you know what I'm talking about.